This is the Open University.
Hello dearly beloved, I'm back in Paris and it's very hot out on the square. Sunshine, people sweltering, summer clothes, a summer atmosphere, hotter actually than either Seoul or anywhere we were in Japan. But I wanted to think back to this 2 months I've just had, and particularly about the last 5 days in Seoul. We kind of bookended the Japan trip with about a week in Seoul at each end, and I've already shown you the first part. The extraordinary thing is that so much changes so quickly in Seoul that places, cafes and shops or restaurants that we went to in April were no longer there in June, in early June, and that's just the nature of the beast. That is Seoul. You know, you go there and things are like mushrooms. There was a cafe called Konhas that we were at 2 years ago that was like a swimming pool where a lot of pretty girls were bathing their feet in the pool and sipping ice cold lattes. That had gone from Hanam, but actually Konhas had sprung up like mushrooms in other parts of town, and there was a very luxurious version of the cafe without the swimming pool but with a lot of media art and sort of fun things going on. Near the Dongdaemun Design Plaza, or for instance there was Nudake in Seongsu, which looked like a feature of Seongsu that was always going to be there. That closed down in between April and June, and sprung up in other places like in North Ganyam. There was a branch of Nudake which was inside a Gentle Monster store. And down in the basement you had all this video art and stuff going on as well. So a lot of trendy retro marketing on sort of smashed walls. We actually attended the opening of OFR, which was a new branch of the Paris bookshop. The owner of the bookshop was out there in Seoul. I don't think he saw us. We're kind of regulars in his shop, but we never buy anything, so we're a bit nervous to talk to him. Flew with Air China, which had base price a ticket of 35 euros, I think it costs to fly for one person from London to Seoul via Beijing. It was on an Airbus A350, a new one, on the way there, and then a Boeing 777 on the way back. Tedious, especially the flight back, which is 10 hours of kind of bouncy castle flight, and nothing too serious, but if you're sitting right beside the wing, a window seat is fairly useless because you just see this enormous wing for 10 or 11 hours. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. I want to talk about the nature of Seoul, what it's like when just to be away for a couple of months is to see the city completely changed. The marketing and the capitalism is always, it's nicely pretentious. I find it interestingly pretentious. And that's really what I want to talk about with the help of my slides. So you're going to see my colored photographs of Seoul. I showed you already the first trip back in April. So much changed even since then. OFR Books opened a branch. We went to the opening. OFR, which is a Paris-based bookshop, but which mostly sells to Koreans on holiday in Paris, and mostly sells tote bags rather than art books. But the art books are what kind of draws people to it, and they have a little gallery in the back. And they opened in Seoul. They'd already had a shop selling goods, which is sort of collaboration with a local household goods and kind of gimmicks maker. But they this time opened an art bookshop there as well, just to coincide, actually, I don't know if this was deliberate or not, with the closure of Post Poetics, which is another famous bookstore there in Seoul, and which we'd met the owner because Justin and Misaki, our friends, had a pop-up exhibition of Misaki's pottery a couple of years ago when we were in Seoul. They were also in Japan, and we were supposed to meet up with them, but in the end it wasn't possible. But yeah, it was a bit sad to see Post Poetics close down. They had all these Arnold Circus stools for sale for about 70 quid for, you know, a stack of 4 of them, all stacked by colour. So all the pink ones were together. If we hadn't had to travel with luggage back to Europe, it would have been tempting to buy those because it was a good price for them. But yeah, sad to see Post Poetics go. And but that's just one example of all the things that change there. And so let's have a little guided tour via my slides and talk about Seoul, because I know Japan content always gets good viewership on YouTube, but I personally find Seoul more interesting. Certainly Kyoto, where we spent most of our time this time, is less interesting and much more over touristified than Seoul, where you know, there are people there in Seoul. They're not the same tourists. They tend to be younger and more interested in K-pop, obviously, and things like that. But they're also spread out across the city in ways that dilute them. So you don't really get the same sense of being part of an alien army invading a city as you do in Kyoto. And this really got to us. I think really the sense of us being a toxic and disparate, discrete kind of group who are not really helping the city and clogging up all the shrines and temples and things that are, of course, Kyoto's main attraction. But one felt a bit resented, I think, in Kyoto, or you know, put up with, to be honest. And it felt kind of unpleasant to be going to the usual cafes and just see foreigners. So one might as well have been back in Europe. Whereas in Seoul, it's more like, I don't know, it seems like it's the banner bearer, the standard bearer for a kind of capitalism which is interesting, relatively inclusive, progressive. It seems to be a good argument for capitalism not being toxic inherently. So let's talk a little bit more about what we're seeing going on in these pictures, because that's in a sweet spot. That's a culture in a sweet spot. Demographically, they have problems in the long run. They're going to have a collapse in their population, just like Japan has. They're going to have a more geriatric and cautious population, and resentful, and you know, all the conservatism and the cautiousness that comes with age is going to afflict them, just as it will also afflict China very soon. So we don't know what the future is, but it's in a sweet spot just now because it's got that sense of optimism and progress and color and cuteness as well, because the Asian model, it's a sociological fact rather than a fact of pure economics, that they reached a certain growth level, which was up, you know, it was something like 10% in a decade or so ago, but it's now just hovering between 1 and 2% growth per year. So there's still a sense of, you know, buoyant expectations that comes with that, but it's not as buoyant as it would have been before. But there's a sense that they have a culture which is oriented to respect and cuteness and kind of infantilization, you'd have to say, as well, like the Japanese culture. These things are all facets of Asian Confucian cultures, I think, but of course they're all played out differently. Whether you're in China, you get one model, and if you're in Japan, you get another, and in South Korea, yet another, North Korea, an even more different version of it. Japan is kind of still hung up on America and wants to kind of be America. in the 50s, you know, a sort of more conservative and kind America. I think they're a bit dismayed by what's happening in today's America. They don't quite know how to respond to it because they're very much still under the umbrella of the military might of the US and protected from China, which has its own increasing military might just now. South Korea, it's very militarized. Both Koreas are very militarized. That's one thing that really strikes you. You see a lot of people still doing national service, even the famous boy bands, you know, going through national service, and a lot of people, couples on the street where the guy is in uniform and is just, you know, on leave from his military service, obviously. I find that all, you know, unpleasant. But then I find it unpleasant to come back here to Paris and see soldiers with machine guns on the street, as I just did, patrolling the city, presumably part of the Vigipirate project to stop terrorists. But really, you know, just there's a certain kind of tension on the streets here. And especially in Britain, when you arrive at Heathrow Airport, for instance, and you see the sniffer dogs and you see the kind of customs officials in combat gear and the big signs saying British border, welcome to a British border, you see that it's part of a burgeoning Anglo-Saxon fascism, which is horrible and is particularly acute, obviously, in today's America, with Trump sending helicopter gunships across Los Angeles and all the rest of it, and also in the Middle East, obviously. So there are these flashpoints and these crisis points for capitalism right now, but South Korea is not one of them. It just seems to work. I mean, you know, it's a kind of chaotic, shambolic city with lots of trash lying about everywhere, and traffic way too dominant in the city. There's really no equivalent to Anne Hidalgo, the Parisian mayor, who's slowly but surely pedestrianizing the streets of Paris and banishing cars to the outskirts. I mean, I just walked around the city, Le Marais and Bastille area. You can walk 10, 15 kilometers a day quite happily because everything is very close to everything else. But Seoul is a vast city. I mean, something like, I don't know, how many millions? It's 14 million in the Greater Seoul area, something like that. Maybe more, maybe 20 million, depending on how you define the boundaries. But it's a large percentage of the South Korean population who've all gathered in one place. So it has this excitement and this kind of electric energy which you don't really find elsewhere. Certainly don't find it in provincial Japanese cities like Kyoto. It's just got the size to have the dynamic momentum that makes for a really exciting urban experience. So we find now that the Korean part of our trips, although they might be the minority in terms of time spent, they're the most exciting parts of these Asian trips that we make these days. If we go to Japan, Korea is really the icing on the cake. And I still feel a lot of affection for Japan, especially the run-down, wabi-sabi kind of shitty, shitamachi kind of parts of Showa, retro urban experience in Japan. I still really like the old people and the kind of the sense of a future that vanished, a future they had in, say, the 80s that disappeared and left a kind of Planet of the Apes superstructure, infrastructure for people like us to explore urban exploration. So we would make a beeline for places that just looked run down and a bit neglected, a bit forgotten. Shikoku was amazing. You know, that Imabari had a lot of those sorts of arcades with no people, and some little initiatives here and there. Onomichi is also a very interesting little town that has a kind of artistic risorgimento going on. People buying up and remaking old wooden houses on the hillside where cars can't even go because it's just little goat tracks up the side of the hill. But then also this kind of vibrant port atmosphere, beautiful scenery, and all the sort of land bridge across to Shikoku, the bridges hopping across the islands. So that was all exciting in a kind of run-down Japanese post-peak way. But where the peak actually is, where the crest of the wave actually is in terms of a society that's right in the present, you know, which is winning the Nobel Prize. Han Kan last year won the 2024, I think it was, Nobel Prize was won by South Korea. The pop music is being dominated worldwide by Korean girl and boy bands who have the level of pretension and ambition to make their work interesting. I find now I wasn't very interested in K-pop, in the last decade or so, but now I think it does have some interesting things going on. Very sad to see New Jeans, my favorite group from that kind of format, battling their ex-label and being replaced by copies and fake versions of themselves, as if to say you're dispensable. And so it's pretty horrific, and there's still a lot of gender conflict going on in South Korea, a lot of male chauvinism and patriarchal attitudes and things. A split as usual between males and females, but also between the older generation and the younger generation. But at the same time, this kind of dynamism in business life of cafes and street markets and just the general experience of being in the city. I can't think of a more exciting urban experience I've ever had in my life than the experience of just getting up in a cheap hotel in Seoul. Our hotel was 200 euros for 5 nights, which is kind of amazing, because in Paris you'd pay 200 euros for 1 night and get a kind of boring, shitty experience. But just the experience of waking up and going out and finding a new cafe to go to, because there's like 1,000 really good cafes in Seoul, and then just always stumbling on new things and seeing new sights and taking photographs of things, walking for miles, finding a cafe where everyone's knitting and sewing with sewing machines on the tables, finding a cafe where everything's like RT video screens and or Ron Muek like heads, ultra hyper realist heads which are huge and have machines behind them moving them around, with hydraulics, robots scuttling about. So enjoy the photographs and enjoy the idea that there is a place where there's a sort of exciting technological future and also a cultural future, which is a popular, commercial art forms, but also serious art forms like film and literature winning the prizes that, say, Japan would have been winning back in the 60s when Toru Takemitsu would make scores for your film and then you'd win at Cannes the Palme d'Or or whatever. There are moments in the history of a culture when it's trying hard to score points and it believes in itself and it believes also in the standards of the world. This is what I call super legitimacy, because a culture which believes in the legitimacy of the world's standards is a happy culture. It's a culture, it's like a young person who really believes still in their parents' values and really swells with pride when their parent gives them a pat on the head. It doesn't always last. You kind of transcend your parents' values in some ways, or rebel against them or whatever, or you just become nihilistic and don't believe there are any values except power and money and corruption, whatever. Which is, I think, really what we're seeing in the US just now. Whatever stated values there are in the Trump administration, it's really a nihilistic administration which believes only in its own pure dominance and in revenge, essentially, on socialists and outgroups and minorities of all kinds and foreigners. And it's a very sad scenario that's playing out over there. It's not a scenario you'll encounter in Seoul, though, and that's why we fly east and not west.
Open University.
Beware, this is not the real Open University, but a synthetic and mendacious Open University devised by Momus, a Scottish electronic folk singer. A choice of viewing now. On BBC Two, you can see a test transmission about the diseases spread by mosquito in sub-Saharan Africa. Meanwhile, on BBC One, we present Bob Harris and the Old Grey Whistle Test.
The Momus album, 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 the Momus album.